Welcome back to the ALLS YouTube channel. Today's episode features another talk by Dr. Rodrigo, head of the Ateneo Laboratory for the Learning Sciences and professor at the Department of Information Systems and Computer Science of the Ateneo de Manila University. The presentation was given at the Society for Technology in Education Philippines Virtual Educators Conference held last July 8 to 10, 2021 with the theme Begin with Self, Innovate with Others, and Transform Our Society. Dr. Rodrigo presented their work titled For People and Planet, an SDG Adventure, a game aimed at teaching young people about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. It is a narrative-based adventure game that tries to frame these different goals in day-to-day contexts to enable players to see them as practices that can be incorporated in our daily choices. Please continue watching to learn more about the design and development of the game.
Good day. My name is Rodrigo. I am a professor at the Department of Information Systems and Computer Science of the Ateneo de Manila University. I am also the head of the Ateneo Laboratory for the Learning Sciences. I am here today to present the work that my team and I have recently completed. It is a game entitled For People and Planet, an SDG Adventure. The purpose of this game is to teach young people about the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals. It tries to frame these different goals in day-to-day contexts to enable players to see these goals not as high-level abstractions, but as practices that all of us can incorporate in our daily choices. This is the outline of my presentation, and I'll go through each of these parts one by one. What we are trying to create is what's known as a persuasive game. It is something that convinces individuals that sustainability is a necessary practice, even if it challenges us as individuals to sacrifice some comforts and conveniences. Awareness about sustainability is something that should start at a young age when mindsets and habits are being developed. It is also important that individuals view sustainability within our own context because ultimately, sustainability solutions begin with the self. Because the 17 Sustainable Development Goals can be overwhelming, the non-profit organization Business for Sustainable Development, formerly known as Philippine Business for the Environment, clustered these 17 goals into 5 thematic areas: natural capital, food systems, social services, livable communities, and ethics and governance. Unfortunately, there is a severe lack of materials that show interconnections of these different systems. Interconnectedness is inherent to sustainability, and it is therefore necessary for our Philippine learners to understand how each of these SDGs relates to the others. The overarching goal of this project is to fill the gap for good sustainability learning materials that would connect not just cognitively but also emotionally to a young Philippine audience. To this end, we aim to create a narrative, contextualized, persuasive, computer-based game and accompanying learning materials that illustrate these 5 thematic areas. Grounding and contextualizing the SDGs in this manner will, we hope, make them more relatable and concrete. There are several existing games that inspired us and that gave us sort of models that we could use to make our design choices. I'm not going to discuss each of these games in detail. I'm just going to mention them. So one of them is a card game called 2030 SDGs game. Another is a simulation game called The World's Future. Go Goals was created by the United Nations. It's an educational board game. Once Upon a Tile is a video game for the mobile phone. World Rescue is a mobile video game. And Oil Springs is another board game that is an expansion of another game called Settlers of Catan. The recurring themes of these games is that they contextualize the SDGs in the day-to-day. They challenge players to solve problems through proper allocation and management of available resources. The games are activity-oriented, and they persuade the players that the fulfillment of the SDGs is the work of individuals, not just large institutions. Now let's talk a little about the game itself. For People and Planet, an SDG Adventure. I have to warn you that my presentation includes video playthroughs of some segments of the game. Unfortunately, as I was rehearsing this, I noticed that the videos weren't playing. So what I'm going to do is I will play the videos for you during our Q&A section. All right. I mentioned already that For People and Planet is a narrative-based adventure game for the mobile phone or tablet. It is built specifically for Android. At this time, we do not have an iOS version yet. The game, I also mentioned before, helps the learners see the SDGs in the context of their day-to-day lives. The player assumes the role of a middle school student in rural Philippines. The gameplay involves exploring areas and playing mini-games to fulfill quests. Information is presented mainly through small chunks of text, accompanied by a colorful background. We use the visual or kinetic novel format for the game. We also include mini-games. Mini-games are a fun way to break the monotony of reading character dialogue and educational text. Mini-games are also a way to provide the learner with opportunities to understand a particular concept. In this case, for instance, the goal of the mini-game is to assemble the contents of a go bag. So the player needs to pick up items that are intended for the go bag. So items such as a whistle over here or the first aid kit over here. The game itself is divided into 5 stories that can be played in any order. In each story, the player is tasked with performing errands and other everyday activities while being shown how the community encourages sustainability and maintains the environment. In the story, What's for Lunch, the player is asked to prepare food for the family's lunch. The player's grandmother asks for the player's assistance with meal preparation and food waste disposal. These tasks are related to SDG 3, 12, 14, and 15, which are good health and well-being, responsible consumption and production, life below water, and life on land. This is the video that, as I mentioned, is not going to play, so I'm going to move forward. In the story, Flood Fighters, the player accompanies the grandmother and learns about disaster risk reduction and disaster risk management both at the community and the household levels. Again, this is the video which I will save for later. In the minigame, sorry, I keep saying minigame, in the story, A Walk in the Park, the player goes to a neighboring town with friends to learn about clean energy and wastewater treatment. In the process, they visit the town's bird sanctuary, and they also make friends with another visitor who unfortunately is the victim of bullying. We'll save the video for later. In the story Work, the player visits the Community Enterprise Center where the grandmother works. They get to chat with various employees of the enterprise who tell the player about their work, which includes ecotourism in the nearby coastal area. Here's the video, which we will save for later. In the story Learning for Everyone, which is the last of the stories, the player befriends a student with low vision, and together they search for the school they search the school for the whereabouts of their grandparents. In the process of searching for their grandparents, they engage in a variety of activities pertaining to the educational system. This is the video, which we will save for later. Now, I mentioned that we created a teacher resource pack. The teacher resource pack is intended for teachers so that they will have some assistance in integrating this game in their classes. The teacher resource pack includes a mapping of the stories against the learning goals stipulated by the Department of Education. The resource pack contains recommended debriefing questions, such as this one: why is it important to stay updated about rainfall advisories and other updates about disasters? This is a question that teachers can ask their students. The resource pack also contains personal projects that students can undertake in order to deepen learning. An example of a personal project is something like this. Next time it rains, try to keep a bucket or large container to catch the rainwater. Place a mesh on top to prevent leaves and other debris from falling in your container. This is an example of something that pretty much anybody can do, because water is a very precious resource, and rainwater particularly is something that we can use at home for things like flushing toilets or washing parts of the house. Now, I wanted to spend some time talking about Nichols Recipe, which was the framework that we used to build the game. Nichols Recipe is what's known as a gamification framework. Gamification refers to the embedding of game elements such as points, badges, achievements, leaderboards in non-game day-to-day activities in order to motivate behavior. Now, using these extrinsic rewards, also known as rewards-based gamification, is often unable to produce lasting change. To encourage behaviors, therefore, Nicholson recommends the use of game design elements to increase intrinsic motivation or meaningful gamification. Meaningful gamification refers to the use of game elements that will enable users to connect the game experience with their own beliefs and allow the transformation of these beliefs, leading to lasting change. Now, one of the things that I have to say at this point is that our game does not actually fit the gamification model, because we're not inserting game elements into a real life situation. Rather, what we show you in this game, or our game, is an example of what's known as game-based learning. So why are we using Nicholson's framework? We are using Nicholson's framework, even if it's for gamification, not for game-based learning, because the themes that it pulls out, that it teases out, resonate with what we are trying to do. So I'm sorry for the confusion, if this is introducing confusion, but let me just emphasize what we are doing in this game is an example of game-based learning, but we find that the principles of gamification, specifically meaningful gamification, actually resonate with what we want to do. Okay. The experience that we're creating is a game itself, but as I said, Nicholson's framework resonates. Nicholson's 6 elements actually apply to the creation of games in general, and not just with gamification specifically. There are 6 elements to recipe: play, exposition, choice, information, engagement, and reflection. If you reorganize the first letters of each of these principles, you will form the word recipe. Okay. First, play refers to voluntary activities that occur within a defined space. Play has rules, but also allows for exploration. Play has constraints, but allows players to modify those constraints as they progress. Most critically, play is intrinsically rewarding. So in our game, there is a waste segregation minigame. The player has to put as much trash as possible in the correct bin within a 30-second time limit. Putting the trash in the correct bin increases the player's score, but putting the trash in the wrong bin results in penalties. The player can play the game earnestly, or he can simply let the time run out. In either case, the player learns. In either case, the player earns the plot item needed to complete the quest, and that plot item stays in the player's inventory, even if the player decides to replay the entire story. This was a design choice made for the players who would like to replay the story but not the mini games. The players can choose to replay the mini games to achieve higher scores, but these scores are not shared publicly, so the choice is wholly for their own personal satisfaction. The other principle is exposition. Exposition refers to the narrative layer of the game. So aside from serving as the backdrop of the game itself, the narrative provides the player with a means of connecting the game with the real world. The game scenarios, I've mentioned several times, are drawn from day-to-day life, so the experiences are typical of day-to-day Philippines. The enacted narrative, which occurs in the game, are connected to the quests themselves. So when a quest is completed, the player receives more information about the narrative. So for example, once a player has helped the farmer at the chai, the player receives a basket of vegetables and in a cutscene. In another example, a walk in the park, the player meets Tanya, a young girl with a disability. The player learns that Tanya was the victim of bullying. The non-player characters have their own backstories. And these are part of the embedded narrative. The backstories provide the game with sort of more texture, more they teach the player about the specific circumstances of the characters and the overall sort of world in which the characters live. The player's decision to take Tanya to the clinic because she was wounded is an example of the emergent narrative. Now, what about the aspect of choice? The player needs to have some control or autonomy over how he or she interacts with the system. In games for learning specifically, the learner should ideally have a choice of activities from which they can learn from the same concept. So what our game does to give the player choice is, first of all, we don't enforce a sequence of stories. I mentioned earlier that the 5 stories can be played out in any order. The player is free to move around the game. Furthermore, the game provides multiple opportunities to learn about an SDG. Now, for information, the information that the learner is supposed to learn is, let me say that again. Information in this case, in the case of Nichols Recipe, refers to game feedback which enables the learning about the real-world context, as well as real-world consequences of the player's choices. Players can receive information through visual displays that represent player or world statistics. In the case of our game, this can be dialogue with NPCs or through narratives. For People and Planet integrates information about sustainability throughout the gameplay. The information that precedes minigames, information can precede minigames or be part of the game mechanics themselves. In the Go Bag minigame, which I spoke about earlier, the player is prompted to find items that should go into the bag. The items should be part. The items that should be part of the bag include things like the flashlight. I pointed to the whistle earlier. I also pointed to the first aid kit, and these are the items. So the player is challenged to click on these different items, and clicking on them puts them in the go bag. Now, engagement in this context, in the context of meaningful gamification, has 2 definitions. Social engagement, which refers to cooperative, collaborative, or competitive interactions with other players, and an engaging game experience in which game difficulty and player skill are well matched. For People and Planet is not a multiplayer game, nor does it have a social media component. However, it is played in a classroom setting. At least that's the intention. So while the players can play the game individually by themselves, the intention is for the game to be part of a lesson of a teacher. And so this opens up the possibility of social engagement with and through the game. Within the game itself, social interaction is simulated through the interactions with non-player characters. The player cooperates with virtual friends and relatives in order to achieve the game's goals. Now, reflection refers to activities that deepen engagement and learning by assisting participants find other interests and past experiences that connect with the game. These opportunities usually occur in the form of debriefings that challenge learners to step back and think about the experience. So in the story A Walk in the Park, the narrator shares that some people with disabilities are unfortunately targeted for harassment. The reflection question for this story is to try to see if your area is PWD friendly. Are there facilities such as easy to use ramps or elevators that wheelchairs can easily pass? If there aren't enough, where do you think these facilities should be added? Now, for future work, what's left? There are several things that are lined up. We are going to conduct a user experience review. We're also going to finish up the teacher resource materials. They're not quite complete yet. And we're also going to conduct tests with actual students. And before I end, I would like to express my gratitude first to our team, composed of Dr. Achut Kuyadkeng, Abby Favis, David D., Joe Torres, Nina Castro, Carlo Magliari, Kevin Mora, Ingrid Harris, Francesco Amante, and the other people who are listed below. We owe our thanks to the University Research Council of the Ateneo de Manila University for providing us with the funding that made this project possible. We thank also Father Johnny Go. The name of the game is For People and Planet, an SDG Adventure. It is available in the Play Store. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to email me. We hope that you enjoyed this presentation. We hope you will download the game. We hope you will find it useful for your classes. Thank you very much for your attention.